Hi there, it's December, so I thought it'd be a good time to talk about autumn and the books that I really enjoyed from autumn, starting with The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, the famous science fiction Victorian novel, which it begins with this guy who's an inventor and he has a circle of friends and he invites them over and they have like discussions about philosophy and science and so on. And he has a time machine, or claims to have built a time machine, and he's gonna show them like a demonstration, and he invites them over, and when they arrive he's not at his own house, and that's strange, and they're eating dinner when suddenly he appears and he's like disheveled, he's covered in mud, his clothes are torn, and he says that like he has to eat food, and then he gets washed up, and then gather around the fireplace and he sits them down and he begins to tell them where he's been. And so it's got that great classic kind of Victorian ghost story atmosphere, which was something I wasn't really expecting, even though like I grew up really watching the 1960s movie of The Time Machine, and I absolutely loved it. So I had this story already like kind of really firmly visualized in my head, and I knew this thing about that it's told, most of the book is told from the perspective of this guy, like to his friends around a fireplace. But at the same time, like, yeah, I wasn't expecting that kind of ghost story-ish kind of vibe. And also the fact that, even though it's a science fiction thing, it's just, we only have this guy's word to go for it, like to rely on, right? And the narrator, who's one of the guests, says that he believes him, but through the other things that he says, and like we get some sort of doubt about how reliable the time traveler actually is. And which I thought that was really interesting. Like they talk about, there was this prank that he pulled on them before, where he told them a ghost story and then had some ghost jump out or something like that, or like that he made something, like, because he's an inventor, to try and fool them into thinking there was a ghost and it was a prank. So the fact that we're dealing with this guy means that his time travel story has to be taken with a grain of salt. I thought that backdrop of unreliability was really interesting, and the way it sets the scene to have you really like interrogating the words on the page as you're reading it. You're kind of like, how plausible is this? And at the same time, it completely sits you there in the room with the roaring fire and all the shadows on being cast on the wall as he tells the story of where he went into the future. So yeah, another thing, like I said that I watched a movie of this. The movie was made in the 60s, so my images of these people are all like very much 1960s style, like makeup and hair and costumes, and like even the world of the future is so related to like the world of the Cold War. Like there's all this sort of, it's I don't want to go into it too much because like there's plot details, but basically there's humanity has fallen away and like kind of evolved into something else, and what happened to civilization is one of the main kind of questions in the book, and that the time traveler is trying to figure out for himself. And in the 60s movie, like he relates it very much to his own time of like, I don't know if it's actually supposed to be set in the 60s, but like for us, the viewer, like it feels like the 60s. There's like this looming threat of World War III. There's the sort of anxiety that of nuclear radiation and like what that's going to do to the earth, right? And what that will do to people. And there's also like this sort of sympathy with social revolution, which is like an oppressed group rising up and throwing off their chains, which is really like of the 60s and really in The Time Machine, the movie. And so I never really realized and appreciated how much that movie was a product of its time until I read the book. Because obviously the book is written and set, like the framing setting of the book is way earlier, right? Like before all these things. So the themes are quite different, even though the story is the same. For example, while the time traveler is trying to make sense of the society he finds himself in between these two groups, the Eloi and the Morlocks, he relates that back to the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution. And of his own time, he starts to say, we've already seen how like the increasing speed of production and the machinations of capitalism have driven men into two different groups, like the proletariat and the elite group, the workers and then the owners of private property. And then it kind of goes into like lots of interesting analyses of how that divide would continue to separate into two distinct groups of people, to the point that they would even evolve differently, like over the millennia. And so I just found that absolutely fascinating. And I've read one other book by H.G. Wells, the Island of Dr. Moreau, and that was also, for me, like, the adventure story was interesting and fun, but the most interesting thing about it was the way that the main character relates the events around him to concerns of his society, England at the turn of the century. The 1960s movie actually is way more exciting. Like, there's a lot more like running through tunnels and stuff like that, which I wish was more in the book. There were some bits of the book which, I felt the movie actually did better. So yeah, while I really like the book, like, it's interesting. The movie had such a strong impact on me that reading the book, I was constantly comparing it to the movie. And also, just this idea of relativism, of the main thing in the book is that the traveler arrives in this time in the future and has to try and figure out the problems of that future by, using his frame of reference, which is his own society's social issues. Having that frame of reference, I think, was really interesting for me, because it makes me think, how would the time traveler interpret that fantasy world of the Eloi and the Morlocks if he came from different points in history, right? Like, if he how would he interpret the future if his present was now, for example, 2020? And that's just something which, like, I don't know, it's something that you could only get from the text, I think, if you had different versions of it made at different points in history. So that was just really an interesting experience for me. Next, I have, what's it called? Beauty in Disarray by Harumi Satoshi. Although her name is different now, it's Satoshi Jakucho. And this was really interesting. Like, it was kind of like a biography. It begins like a biography. The first chapter is the author writing in the first person about how she's doing research for a biography on this Japanese feminist from the early 1900s called Ito Noe. And so she travels back to her hometown and starts to, pick up details about her life and interview her surviving family members and so on. And then from the second chapter on, it's basically like a historical fiction based around the circles that Ito Noe moved in. It doesn't really stick with her as a main character. So she was, among other things, the editor of a feminist journal called Seito, or Bluestocking in English. And this journal was like a sensation at the time. It had a lot of sort of incendiary opinions and so on, and like and at that time, feminists tended to come from, like kind of elite and wealthy backgrounds. All like most of the main people were wives of famous men, like famous male writers. It was sort of, like, I think normal, not just in Japan, but in lots of societies, for for women who had that sort of education to belong to a wealthy elite. But Ito Noe is kind of different. Like, she came from quite a poor family, and it's sort of through a string of associations and chances and risks that she took that she ended up working for this magazine and eventually becoming its editor. So in a way, like, she is one of the most interesting characters to follow. But the novel, yeah, like, it doesn't really follow her story. It kind of follows the journal and the people involved with the journal. And the characters are really interesting, and that's what made this book a really interesting read. The plotting is kind of all over the place, and the language itself isn't really fun. It's like, isn't really engaging, I should say. Like, and I thought that was just a poor translation. But I have a Japanese friend who read it, and she also said she felt that the writer's prose in Japanese didn't fit the actual characters, that it sounded sort of too formal and stuffy, whereas these are sort of like really, rebellious, incendiary feminists who were completely like, putting themselves at risk with the words that they were saying, with the arguments they were making for female emancipation, things about like abortion, like that, like trying to legalize it, about living together out of wedlock, and things like some things which are still hugely contentious today, and some things which aren't. But all of them at the time were like completely like radical progressive positions, which made like sent huge shockwaves through Japanese society. And yeah, I think it's just such a valuable book for that reason, because like people don't think of Japanese society as having this like a history of feminism and female empowerment compared to say Western countries, and it's really there, and it's really interesting like how it develops, and the characters involved are also like, it's not like a history book. It's really like kind of getting into the lives of these characters, and so there's lots of like love affairs and love letters being sent to each other, and the reaction of the press and how the women deal, like individually they deal with the stresses of putting themselves out there as feminists, as radical feminists. Some of them are also anarchists. There's like a strong kind of link between anarchy and feminism at the time, because both are like kind of about, destroying societal norms and so on. But it's definitely not like a political book, I would say. In fact, like for me, I really wish it leaned more into the arguments that the women had. Much as I loved all the scandal and drama and like lesbianism between some of the characters and free love, like non-monogamous relationships and lots of stuff being explored, and the way that the characters go through all that is just really interesting, and like again feels so modern, feels so like even now it's there's a lot of social stuff which is like kind of taboo or at least not mainstream, and it's explored here. The book, I should say, was written I think in the early 70s, both in the 70s I guess and in the 1920s in Japan. There's a feminist kind of movement, right? Radical feminist movement. So it's interesting, I guess, that people would be drawing links, like the writer would be drawing links. It's not in the text, but I guess it's kind of like outside the text, if that makes sense. But anyway, yeah, it's super interesting and really fun to read, actually. I really enjoyed this book. It seems like a really weird comparison, but it reminded me of when I read Tolstoy in university. I read Anna Karenina, and there's like, I had conversations with friends about the characters because they were really well-rounded, where you could see their flaws and you could see their strengths. And for me, sometimes one character like Oblonsky, his strengths, like kind of outweighed his flaws, whereas for another character, I forget Anna Karenina's husband, just Karenin, I guess, for me, his flaws really were way worse than his strengths. And so I really didn't like him as a character. But I had another friend who we argued about this because he felt exactly the opposite. Like he hated Oblonsky, but he liked Karenin and felt sorry for him. So like that way of drawing a character where you've got the nuance and you've got lots of likable and dislikable traits together so that the reader really makes up their mind based on their own values, is something that I don't come across very often in fiction, I feel. And I think that this book, not Anna Karenina, this book, Beauty in Disarray, really did that, because there were the characters I hated and characters I really loved. And I feel that if somebody else read the book, they would have different opinions about who they hated and loved, even though we read the same thing. So I really need to talk more to my Japanese friend about it, the one who read it, because I really would like to get other people's feedback on the characters and like who they liked and who they didn't like and for what reasons. Because yeah, for that for me really was the strength of the book. The plot kind of goes all over the place, like the way that it's structured, and the ending is super random. But like just if you take the characters, just like you're following them, like just to move in those circles, like that's what the fun part about the book was, like putting you like in the heart of the Japanese feminist movement of that time. Moving on to The Whitby Witches, a book I actually own. This is what I read for Halloween. This is my big Halloween read. I started on Halloween. I finished in November, and it was, oh, wow. It's a pretty old book. Did you hear that crack of the spine? I think it's not going to recover from that. But anyway, yeah, this book, right, like it was really fun. It's set in the English town of Whitby, which is, I think, famous for most people, famous because Dracula arrived there, like in the novel Dracula. That's how he gets to England, via Whitby. And I think most of Dracula is set in Whitby, but I'm not sure. Anyway, there's no Dracula in this, but obviously the writer Robin Jarvis loves this town because his descriptions of the town can only have been written by someone who's spent a lot of time there and just like sort of like got a painterly way of looking around the city and picking out details and like giving you not the city, the town, the seaside town, and giving you a sense of just being there, and like including like things like tourism, and it's like it's not overly romanticized. It just feels really, really real. It's got such a huge presence. Like it's the main character really is Whitby. And I think this is what you'd call a middle grade novel. It's like definitely for younger kids, I would say. Even though there's like there's a lot of death in it. It's got a body count, and it's about these orphaned kids who get sent to live with. I don't know if she's a relative. Is she like a distant relative or a friend of a relative, or somehow they're connected to this woman called Alice Boston, and she lives in Whitby, and she's got a group like a ladies' circle, and they do some spooky things. and I'm not going to go into it because it's kind of you don't find out a lot until way into the book. The whole beginning part of the book is just like atmosphere and setup and going through the town and mysterious things happening, as well as the main sort of plot about the children. There's also these supernatural creatures called the fisher folk or the off-waders, and they are, I presume, they seem to be taken from real folklore. A lot of this I feel like feels like he's taken real folklore, like connected to Whitby. Yeah, like this black dog thing. I think the black dog is like something that is not just in Whitby, but like in English folklore and in general. Like it appears in Harry Potter and it appears in other stuff that I've read. So it gives me like this whole book gives me such an English vibe that it's like ridiculous. The first sentence is about drinking tea. And the first paragraph includes the sentence, "A delicious shudder ran down her spine as she sank her small, irregular teeth into a dunked digestive." Like, how British do you get? Dunking a biscuit into tea and then having like an orgasmic experience from the soggy biscuit. It's just... And I think it's raining outside and just the whole atmosphere from the first page. I was just back in the UK basically. And that was really nice. That was really like... It captures that Britishness and also and connects it to folk tales and stuff like that, and has a fun adventure story. The plotting is really good. Like actually the beginning plotting is like so atmospheric, but he always gives you just enough like kind of plot like plot progression push. It gives you just enough plot progression to like keep you like really excited, while at the same time not much happens for a lot of it. And like the negative side is really that when things do happen, they're kind of random, and when we get to the climax at the end, he just sort of throws everything he has at it. There's a sort of Lovecraftian thing going all the way through the backstory of the fisher folk, and there's like these sort of mysterious creatures called the Deep Ones, or like some sort of godlike beings that live at the bottom of the sea, which are frequently alluded to. And then like when the climax comes, they play a role in it, and it really, I don't want to give too much away, but like it's quite, I don't know, it's disappointing. It's disappointing because then that's not even the main climax. Then there's another one, and then there's another one, and there's just like lots of wild stuff happens, and it feels like Robin Jarvis really wanted to just get all the Whitby knowledge that he had and like put it together in this phantasmagoria of images for the ending, which is quite, like bold, but to be honest, didn't really work. It's like he threw everything he had, but none of it really landed. Or when it landed, it didn't have any weight, if that makes sense. Like, it was just like, oh wow, lots of stuff, and then the book's over. And yeah, it's a shame because like I loved it all the way through until like it started to fall apart near the end. And then, yeah, like when it ended, it made me feel like I didn't really want to read the rest of the series. This is the first in a trilogy. So yeah, I don't know if I will. But definitely just the atmosphere for most of it was so fun to be involved with and to just hang out with these. I didn't talk about the old ladies. It's got a real kind of Miss Marple vibe as well. So, the old unassuming ladies, they've got their own little circle, and they know that something's up, and nobody really takes them seriously because they're just like, from the point of view of most people in the village, they seem like kind of nosy, interfering, busybodies, like that kind of thing, and they don't have all their marbles together in one place, and they're just seen as like, not important players in society, but actually we know that they are in touch with the supernatural things going on, and they have knowledge and wisdom which is going to help us get through the plot of the story. And yeah, like it's like I said, that sort of Miss Marple vibe of the old lady actually, being really sharp and being able to solve the mystery. And the mysteries do get solved, and they are fun to read through. So yeah, like if you want an English seaside supernatural mystery thing with unassuming old ladies as protagonists, then you can't really go wrong, I guess. I love the way that he connects this middle grade adventure story with like folklore, and he connects the folklore to his own sort of Lovecraftian styled mythology, and like he creates like a fictional kind of past for the magic elements of the story, the fisher folk and so on. And that like those hints of something that happened earlier are really well done, I think. And I really, if I did read more of these, then I'd really hope that he developed that side of it, because yeah, it gives a real strong sense of place and world. And yeah, like the setting was just, the whole thing was the setting was everything. And then like finally I did a book review of Flights already, and I didn't enjoy Flights as a whole as much as I enjoyed these three books, but there were bits of Flights which were some of the best things that I've read, definitely in the autumn, probably the whole year. So I feel like I should talk about, like, it's a weird book that has lots of stories like throughout it, including one about a Polish family who go on vacation to an island in Croatia, and the car stops, and because the kid needs to like pee somewhere, and so the mum takes him off, and then like 15 minutes pass, and then the dad gets out and looks, and they're just vanished. They're vanished from the island. And so then the story is sort of like becomes this thriller, right? Like where he's going to the police and they're looking around, and then there's the next day, and like this feeling of like the tension mounting just as time passes, because when you have people who disappear, if they don't appear within a few hours, it's more dangerous than if it's just a little bit of time, and then a few days again, like, so just that sense of tension and time, and the psychological state of this guy who, like, his family is just gone, and he's trying to figure out like what's going on, and like I don't know, it's just brilliant. It's written so wonderfully, the prose is amazing, and I absolutely love that story. And I had a weird experience with it, because it ends, it's not spoilery really, it ends on a kind of cliffhangery bit, and then I had to return the book to the library, and I didn't get it back for like a month, and then when I did get it back, I was excited to see what happened next, and then the story had actually ended, and it doesn't return until way later in the novel, and so that was kind of not exactly frustrating, but it's weird when you're really looking forward to reading something in a book, and that you presume will be there, and then the book is actually something totally different. It can be a good experience, or it can just be a strange one. In this case, it was just strange, I guess. Another story which was brilliant was about a Polish woman who, I didn't say that the author was Polish, but like Olga Tokarczuk, yeah, the author of this book is Polish, and lots of the characters in the stories are Polish, including Chopin, who I thought was French, because I think you pronounce his name Chopin, right? The composer, right? The famous composer. I didn't know he was actually Polish, but I learned that from this book. Thank you, book. But yeah, there's a story about him and his heart, because he dies and he wants his heart buried in Poland or something, and then there's a big thing about moving his heart over the border, and yeah, that was really exciting. And then there's this Polish lady who lives on an island off the coast of Australia, I think, and she gets an email from her lover, from like her first true love from back in Poland, and it's what's insinuated but not said directly, is that the guy wants her to help him kill himself, like because he has a degenerative disease. They're older, they're like kind of like I think in their 60s, and so like not that old, but like kind of he's lived like a large section of his life, and he's a politician or something. And anyway, yeah, they were lovers, and her job is what's the word? Culling? I don't know if it's culling, but it's like killing invasive species, basically to protect Australian marsupials or whatever. So she knows a bit about like poisons and so on. So he asks her, because they'd already made a promise to meet again one day, to come and meet him and help him kill himself, like via euthanasia or whatever. And yeah, it's a brilliant story, because it's got that sense of your first love as someone who was a huge part of your life, and also of place, because she doesn't speak so much Polish anymore, and Poland looks totally different to her, just like her old lover does look totally different. And like it's this sort of sense of connection with your past and with the things that were really formative for you, as an emotional being, right? And then going back to them years later and like kind of well, in this case, actually killing them off, like literally killing them off. And it feels like it could be a really heavy-handed metaphor, and there are heavy-handed metaphors in this book, but this isn't one of them, thankfully. It was really touching, and like the most emotional story in the book, definitely for me, was this one about the ex-lover. So yeah, those were some of the stories from Flights, which was, yeah, like I said, a really mixed bag for me. Overall, like I felt like it had so many failings but like in the small bits, like the small stories, some of them were just so brilliant that I felt I had to talk about them here as well. And also because I didn't really talk about them in the review, and I felt a bit bad about, saying at the end, oh, it was a 4-star book, and then not really going into the positives. So yeah, the short stories were really great. That's it. That's all I'm going to say, I think. Those were the best things I read in autumn, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Hope you're well. Bye-bye.